We believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast, brought to you by 7M Ventures and Andrew Wommack Ministries.
Well, welcome to our Truth and Liberty live cast. We do this every Monday night, and I am really glad that you've joined us. I'm Andrew Wommack. We've got Richard Harris over here and Karen Conrad, and we are all here. We're a part of Truth and Liberty, and tonight our special guest is Lance Wallnau, and he's remoting in from Dallas. And Lance is a blessing. I guarantee you, you will be challenged by Lance. He just has a different way of looking at things and talking about, and it's going to be a great, great time. We're going to be talking about some things that are happening in our nation right now.
Yeah.
But we're going to let Karen, first of all, tell you how you can be a part of this. It's a live broadcast, and you can actually interact with us, and so she'll give you all of the details here.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody, to Truth and Liberty. It's going to be a great evening, and we are so glad you joined us. Just a reminder to share this broadcast with friends and family. The information that we cover are things that are really necessary in the nation, and you don't want to miss tonight with Lance Wallnau. So just a few things to update you. First of all, we want to encourage you, if you would like to ask questions, as Andrew mentioned, this is an interactive broadcast. If you are on social media, you can put your question right in the comment section. We've got a whole team standing by, and they'll pull those questions and push them forward here to the iPad. Also, if you're watching on Truth and Liberty or awmi.net, you can put that question in the chat section. And we want to encourage you too, if you're watching on social media, we really appreciate it. We've had a few nights where we have had our program actually censored. And so if you want to make sure that you've got a consistent video stream, join us at truthandliberty.net, and you can also subscribe there as well and get updates on Truth and Liberty. Do you know, we've got a couple things coming up here at the ministry. We had an amazing weekend with the event, which we'll probably talk about a little bit.
It was really good.
And we had King David, and we've got Heart of Christmas coming up. So if you want to celebrate Christmas with the ministry and in the mountains, please join us. It's on December 7th through the 9th. We've got our whole new auditorium that is all ready to go. And also we've got a brand new DVD, Heart of Christmas, which you can purchase at awmi.net.
And Karen, let me just add that we really dress this place up at Christmas, and they've been decorating our brand new portion, and it's just beautiful. It is something to come and see, and it would be a great way for you to celebrate Christmas.
It would, just even the lights, coming into the property.
And then the performance is top-notch. It is excellent. I guarantee you, if you ever see it, you'll want to come and be a part of it every single year. It's a great Christmas tradition.
It is. Thank you. And every week we give away a product. And last week we had actually Bill Federer on, who was a great guest. If you missed that program, go into the archives at truthandliberty.net. And he's got a book called What Every American Needs to Know About the Koran. And we want to congratulate Dave and Susan Bender. You have won that book, and Bill signed it when he was here, so that's on the way. And then tonight we're giving away one of my favorite books of Andrew's, Don't Limit God.
Let me sign this one.
Yes, here's a pen. Maybe you've got your own pen.
I got my own, but I can use yours.
I'll tell you what, Don't Limit God is something that I hear about all the time when I talk to people. It just challenges you to think bigger. And you know what? This is just a testimony here at the ministry of Andrew with that revelation of Don't Limit God. So for you to be eligible for that giveaway, go ahead and register and subscribe at truthandliberty.net. And I want to thank those of you. Do you know, we have got people that are giving towards this broadcast. Thank you so much if you are one of those. This is a viewer-supported broadcast, and if this is a blessing to you, please consider giving towards this broadcast. And you can do that by going to truthandliberty.net, click on Give, or you can call the phone center at 719-635-1111. We have got prayer ministers standing by, and I want to encourage you, if you need prayer or if you have questions on anything, they are there for you. Thank you.
And let me also mention Richard Harris. If you aren't a regular viewer, he is on staff with us. He's a practicing lawyer, but he's working primarily for us in our school of practical government school. He's actually had a case argued before the Supreme Court, and he adds a lot of credibility to what we have to say. I may say something that is, it's correct, but it may not be technically correct, and he's always dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and he is a great resource.
He is, and also...
It's so good to be here.
Oh, we're so thankful for you. And Richard, this stack of papers, I'll tell you, Richard puts this together. He researches articles and things that are current and things that we feel that you need to know. And all of this is on truthandliberty.net. And we just launched our updated website this week as well.
Yeah. And this is just the new stuff.
That's right.
This is probably what,
Just
60 pages?
It's actually 100.
I was going to say, I was trying to be conservative, and this is the new stuff. We already have hundreds and hundreds of pages, and our Truth and Liberty is a real resource. We aren't trying to reinvent the wheel. A lot of it is just directing you to other websites where you can get your questions answered.
That's true. And one of the features that we just added with the new website is you can search by topic or by name. So, for example, if you want all the information on abortion and you want to read about that, when you enter that information in, all those articles and programs come up, and that's a brand new feature.
Yeah, so that's a new feature. Go check it out. All right, so we got Lance Wallnau with us. Welcome, Lance. We are glad to have you.
It's good to be on, and I want to comment immediately that these are earbuds and not new art expressions that are on my head.
We thought you were wearing like earrings or something like that.
That's why I wanted to preempt your comment.
But Lance is a blessing, and Lance has pastored, but he has been drawn or led into being more active politically, and he is on some, I'm not sure what the right way to say this is, Lance, but you get to meet with the president. He's drawn on your resources. You're part of things that he does. You meet with politicians. You told us you're going to meet with the president of Poland next week.
Yes, we just made that decision, and there's presidents that are, it's interesting, Andrew. The presidents are opening up in Central America and Europe. And I think it's because Donald Trump has given such gravitas to evangelicals that nobody who would give us a time of day before actually want to meet. And even though and they understand nobody's speaking in an official capacity representing anything from the State Department, they say, that doesn't matter. Come meet with us. So what an open door right now. America is a model of something, apart from what CNN and the news media is doing to destroy and trash America's reputation globally. Donald Trump still stands as one of the enigmatic, fascinating leaders around the world, and the church globally knows that he is standing literally straddling the fence, straddling the gateway to religious liberty and holding back oppression that otherwise would be unleashed.
And I've heard many reports that the Muslims really respect Trump because they understand him. They understand strength. They don't understand the weakness that has been portrayed.
Yeah, and they don't like ambiguity. One thing about Donald Trump, whether you like him or don't like him,
you know where he stands.
To media, because everything that comes out of him is an incendiary soundbite around the world.
Well, Lance, we've got a number of things we want to talk about, but briefly, last week we talked with Bill Federer and we discussed the midterm elections, and as a whole, I expressed, and I think all of us here were in agreement, that there were some losses. We wished it would have been better. We wished that the Republicans would have held the House, but we put a positive spin on it that I think it was better than historically the out of, the out of the White House party, the party that is not inhabiting the White House. They did better than traditionally. So anyway, that was the take we took on it. How say you? What do you think?
Oh, man, listen, never in the history of modern media has a president had 95%, 24-hour-a-day, Democrat-dominated slander and misrepresentation to polarize and propagandize the population and still come out with a 45 to 50% approval rating. It's maddening to the left that they cannot move the needle against him when it comes to across-the-board popularity. What the election, however, shows isn't what in spite of what the left tried to make it, it isn't about Donald Trump. It's really local politics. It's about your own county, your own state, your own, it's really funny how there's like surveys out that say that 90% of Americans say that Congress is ineffective and they hate it. with the exception of their own local congressman. And that creates a problem because they're only voting for their own local congressman.
Yeah.
So the reality is this. Trump has actually joined the annals of only three other presidents or four presidents that has been able to not only survive midterms, but actually gain seats in the Senate. So this is the story nobody told. And the fact is that from a county by county point of view, the great blue wave became a little blue tinkle of energy. And because there was the Trump factor. Never has there been a president who went almost like Napoleon on a battlefield from point to point to point where the battle was in the balance and pushed the people that embraced him over the finish line. It's the envy of every politician. They will not say it, that someone in electoral politics can fill an arena of 10 to 15 or 20,000, or in the case of Texas, 100,000. Not one politician can do that. And Trump alone was the tour de force that held the blood loss in the Congress down to where it was. And increase the Senate marginally.
And so, I also think that when you think that there were 60 Republicans who resigned and didn't run for re-election, and so there had to be a new person come up instead of the incumbent, when you look at the fact that Obama lost 63 seats in his off-year election, and you look at all of these things, and then one of the things that impressed me was that all of the Trump haters that came out against him, every one of them were defeated, which I think was a vote for Trump. Even though the Democrat might have won, they were voting against the rhinos that did not do what they promised that they'd do.
And the first thing you said was probably the most important, which is the number of vacated seats that had to be defended made that 11 to 15 majority possible for the Democrats because there was such a number of seats that were there. And there's a combination of factors. A lot of them were indeed rhinos. And the untold story, Andrew, that we probably need to do, like I miss those 60 Minutes in the old days. They were so suspenseful, tick, 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 and then they come up with the next segment. We need to have a segment that talks about why certain congressmen decided not to return to public service. And the reason is the harassment their wives and kids and families went through over an increasingly hostile and violent and unpredictable Democratic left.
That is absolutely true.
So sad.
We could probably talk about that the entire time, but let's move on to some other things. Another thing that I saw today that really encouraged me is today, November the 19th, is the 155th anniversary of Lincoln giving the Gettysburg Address. And that just made me go back and think about where our nation was in the Civil War. And I mean, it was hanging in the balance.
Absolutely.
This could have gone either direction. And I think that there's direct parallels today. And so, Lance, I know you've got some feelings. We've talked about this some. And what do you think about that comparison?
I think the comparison is spot on because I had felt all along. I mean, I was reading with apprehension the prediction of many that were in the prophetic community about the red wave, and I cautioned people constantly. I said, we are not at the place of unity or influence yet where we have a red wave. What we can hope for is a red wall that will stop a blue wave, which is what happened. But we are, as Dinesh D'Souza has a movie out that likens Lincoln to Trump and Trump to Lincoln, we are living through the crucible of a similar period of time with a civil war in the realm of ideas right now. And Lincoln basically gave his great speech about, that we are a house divided. And that's exactly where we ended up. Congress on one side, Senate on the other. Governor seats in key areas, by the way, were picked up, which is important for 2020, Indiana, Florida, Ohio. And so those are the key states for the Electoral College. But here's the thing that excites me about your point. 155 years ago, I didn't know that till you had brought that up, but that the Battle of Gettysburg, like so many moments in American history, was going to be decisive one way or the other, and God intervened through a conspiracy of errors that took place against Robert E. Lee, who had been virtually undefeated from Fredericksburg to Chancellorsville right on into Gettysburg. And the moment that turned the tide wasn't the third day at Pickett's charge, because it was each day there was a key moment that could have lost the battle for the North. It was the second day at a place called Little Round Top. And this little hill that was there was not well defended by the North, and it was the anchor to the North's position. And Lee saw it, and his generals saw it, and realized immediately that if they moved up on that hill and put their artillery there, they could mow down the Union line and cause them to fall back and make their move towards Harrisburg potentially. But there was a colonel who was a seminary student, curious enough, named Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, and a rhetoric professor. He was actually a seminary student and rhetoric professor. And he was a professor in Bowdoin College in Maine, and he was given the assignment of holding Little Round Top. And so his soldiers showed up right at that small key pivotal location at the same time that an Alabama regiment was rushing up to take it. And they hit each other, and they went back and forth until Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain was out of bullets. And the soldiers said to him, "Colonel, we don't have any more bullets, and there's no reinforcements." And Chamberlain looked down the line and saw another mounted attack coming uphill, and he just got a word of knowledge. This is a Christian, mind you. That's the important part. He's praying, and he gets a word of wisdom. And the Lord says to him to have them fix bayonets. They literally all fix bayonets. He said, "We cannot retreat. And if we cannot shoot, then we have to actually advance." So he told them, this is why I like that saying, as one. He said, "What I want you to do is all along the line, I want this part to swing down the mountain, the hill first, then this part join them, and we will move as one. And even without bullets, we'll sweep them off of Round Top." And that's exactly what they did. They fixed bayonets. They had no more bullets really to work with. And he gave the signal, and the back part came around like a hinge, and they moved as one. And they swept that mountain as Colonel Oates' Alabama division came up. And the Oates division was so confused when they saw the sweep come along their side, they thought another regiment had joined the battle. Wow. And so they threw down their weapons and surrendered. That was the decisive moment when the Confederates saw how close they came, and the story got out that the guys were out of bullets. That's when Lee said, "I'm going to break them tomorrow right in the middle."
You know, I've been on Little Round Top, and I knew that was a decisive battle, but I didn't know all the things you were saying. That was very interesting.
But that's the point of Gettysburg. It was decided by a believer taking a key position on a place that nobody saw at first, moving his people in unity when they didn't even have any bullets.
So it wasn't somebody that was just in their prayer closet praying. It was somebody that actually did something, got up and led a charge.
Yes.
That's got some application for us today.
I agree.
I'm not against prayer, but I tell you, I think that prayer has been substituted for getting out and doing something.
I agree.
And if you would have just had, if that, what did you say his name was, Lance?
Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain.
Yeah, if Chamberlain had just said, "Let's everybody pray." If they'd have joined hands and prayed, they'd have all been killed.
That's so true.
They had to do something, and we've got to get up and do something. And you know what? This encourages me because I think that the Civil War, things were actually much worse then than they are now. I mean, I'm not trying to whitewash what's going through now. We are in a cultural war, but things were not just in the spiritual realm or cultural realm. I mean, you were fighting for your life, and yet God pulled that out. And that gives me encouragement that God can do it again today.
Amen.
I'm absolutely believing for that.
I believe it too. So Lincoln's address, was really about the test is whether this government that was conceived 7 years ago, but the idea that whether this government will survive, whether this experiment will survive, and literally the whole world is going to hinge. The future of the world is going to hinge on whether or not the United States can survive the crucible of this era. The challenge is that the Civil War could be decided once it was committed to a military expression and the North was divided from the South. We don't have the same situation in terms of a clear division that allows one side to really vanquish the other. But it certainly is true that the little round top that we've got right now is political office. And for Christians to not get that is dangerous, because whoever occupies that office, whoever occupies the judiciary, can legislate laws and create rules that are going to have a serious impact on the freedom of Christians to operate. Right. So we have to be prepared to win this, Andrew, in the court of public opinion. We have to literally, really engage truth while we have liberty, so that we can expose the falsehoods and the lies and the lack of wisdom in the policies that are being pushed against us right now.
You know, in a way, it would have been easier if there was a physical war, because you were forced back during the Civil War to take sides.
Yes.
I'm sure there was people in the North and the South that didn't want a war, and they would have just as soon avoided it, but they couldn't help it. You were in a battle. We have a huge amount of people in this nation that don't even realize we're in a war yet.
That's true.
Right.
And they aren't standing up. And you can see that by the number of people that don't vote, don't do anything. So in some ways, it's actually would be easier if there was a physical contest that you could see, but people aren't seeing what's happening in our nation.
I agree. I think sometimes they don't know how to engage. And so what do they do? Which is why we talk about that a lot. But they don't know how to fight this cultural war.
I tell you what, I think it starts in you just taking a stand right where you are, in your family, in your neighborhood, at your
really
PTA, and things like that. And if you begin to start influencing people and seeing people change, well, that's where it starts. But then, Lance, we were also talking before the broadcast that you were making comparisons to the Revolution, how that the states were fighting individually, and they would have lost this war if they hadn't have somehow or another come together and fought as a unit.
Yeah, and Washington early on said, we cannot defeat the power of a unified enemy. If the Massachusetts militia shows up to drive the British out of Concord, and then I've got to get the New York militia to fight the British in Long Island, and then I have to get the Pennsylvania militia to deal with them in Philadelphia, we have got to have a continental army. And to show you how far America's gone off course, the beginning of this was about freedom and the ability to not be dictated to by a central government or a king. And they had to literally come together and grant some emergency decision-making to form a continental army to defend the United States, because they started off thinking we're just going to take care of our individual states. And that's where the church is. We're taking care of our individual interests, and we're up against a united continental invasion.
And then they banded together to win the revolution. But if I'm not incorrect, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but after the revolution was won, there was a real fear that there was going to be a powerful central government, and they wanted to go back to the militia, and it was one of the sticking points over the Constitution. And I think Washington, if I'm not correct, is the one that argued that they had to have a standing army and not just militias in order to be able to protect this nation.
Yes, it would be a great conversation to really nail down what it was that the founders were passionate about and what their fears were. They were afraid also regarding the freedom of the press. They had a fear of that, what they call the fourth estate, which would be, you've got the three branches of government and a really unofficial fourth, which is the power of press. And their fear was, what would happen if it ever came under the control of the ruling party? What would happen if it ever ceased to be free as a press and actually became partisan? And you're watching that now. And this is one of the anxieties that they had. And I hate to say it, because this could be easily a soundbite that could be distorted. But Putin in Russia was beginning to get affected by our State Department's policies, because Hillary Clinton and the liberals in the United States were actually putting activist groups into the Ukraine and into Russia in order to get Putin out of power. And Putin's response was to kick out all of the nonprofits and all the government agencies, and to take over the policy of bombarding the Twitter sphere and the media sphere with positive things about what he was doing. And he went from a declining popularity to 90% because he made sure that the press and that the blogger sphere was talking about the strength of Russia and what was working rather than being used by his opposition to take him out of power. And so I'm sitting here thinking, well, what would you rather have? Would you rather have, your political enemies controlling all the information that's out there? Or would you rather have control of that information until your country has the moral fiber and maturity to handle a free press?
But the moment you make it a state-guided press, you run the risk of abuse.
Right.
And this
Sure.
CNN guy that was just kicked out of the White House press conference, everybody's saying that's a freedom of speech issue, First Amendment issue. Even Fox got in on this and joined in the lawsuit against Trump in the White House. And yet that's not freedom of speech. He had, 50 other people in there that he was giving access? He kicked that guy out for being rude and dominating.
Yeah.
He got
It's just amazing how they twist things around.
That's
Well,
true.
what's the Fifth Amendment? What's our lawyer going to say? The Fifth Amendment actually is about due process.
Yeah, due process and self-incrimination.
Yeah,
Right,
but they
it's
also claim the First Amendment that was restricting freedom of speech.
Freedom of press, yeah.
Yeah, and
But here's the main point that the judge ruled on, which is important on this injunction. The judge's rule, because you know what, I was so upset about it, I contacted a former federal judge and I interviewed him. And so he explained to me. He said it's based on the grounds of due process and not on it wasn't based on freedom on the freedom of speech. It was based on due process. And the reason that Trump made the answer he did to Chris Wallace about we're working out some rules now is because the judge said you don't have a process for the press and you cannot arbitrarily therefore remove them unless they're violating the rules. So Trump is going to come out and Sarah Huckabee is going to come out and announce what the rules are. And it's going to be if after 3 strikes, then here's what happens. You get removed from the press pool if you violate these ground rules. So now they're literally having to create rules, which, by the way, is another spiritual lesson. And we think about this every time those of us that travel go through TSA and these groping searches. And that is that lawlessness produces more law.
Right.
And if you want to get out from under authoritarian, more police state activity and more surveillance and more bureaucracy and more legal stuff, people that are actually lawless are the ones that create more processes of law. So Acosta, by abusing the privileges of the press to create a platform to mount his own CNN assault on the president, now they're going to have new laws regarding policies for internally doing this. And then I thought Donald Trump was classically, almost predictably, what should I say, almost adolescent, but I love his temperament when he said, and if that doesn't work, I'm just going to walk out of the press conference. No one can keep me from doing that. And then we'll watch how they straighten out their act.
Yeah. So to simplify this whole thing, if people had just common decency when there's 50 other people and he isn't going to dominate and ask a dozen questions and things like this, if he would add common decency, they wouldn't have even had to come up with rules. And for all of these years, the White House has operated that way until our society has become so crass that now we've got to put rules, laws in place to govern what decency used to dictate.
That's exactly
It is.
right.
And I just want to throw one more thing out there. And this is a personal pet peeve I've got. And it's Fox News standing in solidarity with goofball Acosta. Because, if a guy's throwing food in the restaurant, you're not going to defend his eating behavior. And this is what Acosta deserved to be rebuked. Instead, Fox stands in solidarity. And here's my take on Fox News. In each of those spheres, like those 7 mountains, in the medium mountain, in every mountain, there's a certain elite. In Washington, there's the Beltway elite. In Hollywood, it's the Actors Guild and stuff. In journalism, Fox News wants so desperately to be taken seriously by the New York Times and CNN and MSNBC that they go out of their way, tripping over themselves to prove that they're part of the fraternity. And I can remember when Megyn Kelly was first in that first debate, And she went way outside the margin in order to ask tough questions, because all the Fox guys were saying they think we're not going to be really aggressive. Well, we'll show them we could be really tough, just like they are. And they overmodulate. And this is what annoys me about Fox. We don't hardly have any network representation that stands with conservatives. And the one that we look to is in solidarity with CNN over this issue. And that just annoys me, because I think it's the psychology of trying to be part of the team, and they never will be. Fox will never be treated as a peer in that club.
But you know, this isn't limited to just news media and stuff. I can see the exact same thing has happened in the church.
It's true.
Because back when the Azusa Street revival happened and people were speaking in tongues, and I mean they were falling out on the floor. They were considered weirdos, crazy and stuff. And you had the Assemblies of God and the Holiness Church and stuff, and they were all branded as being uneducated, ignorant, and they had such a desire to be accepted that they started compromising and taking people in the back room to get the baptism and telling people to behave. And it's the same motivation, Lance. It's the exact same thing that's happening with Fox News. We just were created for love and acceptance. We don't like rejection. And people will sell their soul to the devil if it will make them look good in the eyes of other people.
Fear of man.
Well, Andrew, that's why I love you so much, because you're one of the few people I can have a conversation with where we both pretty much destroy ourselves but still survive.
Well, I got to admit that sometimes the only time I open my mouth is to change feet. But praise God.
There's another point that's of interest here. I think we could talk about, and that is that back to the historic moment we're in, from like the Gettysburg Address to the coming together of the Continental Army, the coming together of God's people in a different way. That in the Civil War, the border states were an interesting phenomenon, much like the church. There's a book, if I had time to read it, I was going to order it. It's from a researcher on, get this, the preaching of preachers in the South, in the North, and on the border states. Now imagine this, because these preachers had to deal with this enormous psychological pressure of what the political discourse was surrounding them. But what was interesting was how the border states preachers, for the most part, like Maryland and Kentucky, those places, they preached that God didn't want them getting involved with politics. And to me, almost 90% of the pulpits in America feel like border state preachers, because they got liberals all around them, and they got conservatives in the pews, and confused conservatives, I might add. And rather than taking a position, they're all like preachers in Maryland. They're trying to keep their church growing and stay out of the Civil War.
That is a great analysis.
That is.
It's very good. You know, one other thing, we're going to have to take some questions here in maybe the next 5 minutes, but one other thing, when we had this event, by the way, let me just mention that we had 5,000 online platforms that carried the event, 330,000 views on this, and over 1 million people reached. That was awesome.
It was awesome.
We had Tony Perkins, Mike Huckabee, Mike Ferris,
Kristen Hawkins,
and
Richard.
That was awesome. But anyway, here's one of the things I was wanting to mention to you, Lance, and get your take on it. But Mike Ferris, when he got up and spoke, it was very good. He's a lawyer, and he made a statement, something about how that the liberals, through the court system, have been able to force against the majority of Americans their agenda. And just the way he phrased it really brought it home to me why they are becoming so incensed, because we have turned the Supreme Court around. And Richard, you could give us the exact figures on how many people Trump has appointed to the Appellate Court.
Yeah, well,
how many? There's bunches.
Last count I heard was 26 to the Appellate Court, to the Courts of Appeals, plus the 2 to the Supreme Court, and then he's got 50 to 60 U.S. District Court judges confirmed.
And you also have said this. How many appeals actually make it to the Supreme Court?
Oh, 1%.
And these other appellate courts and things are the ones that are really making a difference. And the liberals, this is how they have been forcing their agenda, and they have lost in this thing already, and it could last for a generation.
Yeah, that's why keeping the U.S. Senate was so critical. You want to look at positive things out of that election. Keeping the U.S. Senate was fantastic because the U.S. House has nothing to say about it other than griping and complaining on the margins. But the U.S. Senate is the one that confirms those judges. So, and judges in the federal system stay on the bench. People say lifetime appointment. Constitution says for good behavior.
Yeah.
But they're there, long after politicians go home. And so lasting influence.
And we've got Ginsburg, I believe, is 88. Is that correct?
Yeah,
she's
she
in
fell
failing
in- She
health.
did. She
Failing
just
health.
fell.
Failing health, I think she busted a couple of ribs. Nobody in the
did.
news is talking about it. It's like they're having an intercessory vigil, I guess, 24/7.
So I think that even before the next election cycle, we could have another Supreme Court justice
Yeah.
appointed, and then if Trump is reelected, we could have another one.
Yeah.
I mean, this is tremendous what's happening, and the way that Mike Ferris phrased this about this is how they have gotten their agenda into America against the majority of the people's opinion.
And it's always that way. And this is the part that Christians have got to wake up on. And it's just maddening that we just don't get it. And that is that if the left doesn't succeed in pushing their agenda through political activism, they go to judicial activism. Because if they can't, for instance, same-sex marriage was not accepted by some 40-some states.
Absolutely.
And when they lost it in terms of being able to have states determine for themselves what their policies were, they went, because they couldn't get it in the national elections, they would go to the Supreme Court to impose it from the top down.
That's right.
We have to remember this. This is the difference between Democrats and Republicans. The Democrats are out for power, and the Republicans, for the most part, play defense. And so you don't win a battle if you're constantly, which is why Donald Trump at first was such a pain to everybody in the Beltway, because he came in combative. And remember what he said, he said, I'll teach you how to win. And that's exactly what he's doing right now. He's teaching them how to win, even if he's the only guy seemingly fighting.
And so if you can't get your agenda across through the mainstream of the people, you go to the judicial system. And if you're losing the judicial system, what do? You go into anarchy and start telling people to start protesting and violence and all of this stuff.
Yeah.
That's their tactic that they're using right
It
now.
is.
That's right.
Create chaos.
Yep. So anyway, we've got about 20 minutes left. Let's go to some questions, and hopefully you'll give Lance a hard question.
Oh, I think I've got some good ones here for Lance. We'll start with this one. This is from Shar, who is watching the broadcast tonight on the AWM chat. And she says, Lance, Lindsey Graham will take over as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He is now a Trump supporter. Do you see him remaining stable and consistent?
Let's all talk about the conversion of Lindsey Graham. First of all, I think that there's a mysterious concept which I don't want to venture into for fear of false theology, but it seems as though John McCain had an undue influence on Lindsey Graham, who suddenly discovered his psychic identity after McCain was gone. And so you didn't ever see Lindsey coming to the forefront like he did in the Kavanaugh hearings during the days of McCain. But when Lindsey Graham made his impassioned statement regarding the outrageousness of what he's literally stepped out of the role of Senate and became a commentator on what he was looking at and how messed up it was. He won the hearts and the approval of millions of conservatives and evangelicals at that point who he had never experienced that kind of approbation from. Immediately, he knew as a politician that his ratings and his approvals and his invitation to Fox and his applause was increasing. It's a weird thing, but he discovered what the Trump phenomena really is. And that is when you take a bold stand for truth, those that have been silent suddenly break out in a roar and a cheer. And you discover, oh my gosh, there's people out there that like this.
I think he had been under the deception that moderation, being a moderate, is the way to do things. And just like you're saying, I think he saw that, man.
It's like he threw off the myth that we're all on the same team. He realized, wait a second, these people are not.
That's right.
Yeah.
standing for what I believe in.
And like he said, if you came to this town looking for a fair, hearing, you came to the wrong place at the wrong time.
That's
And
good.
but now what happened? Here's the danger. And this is really important. We know this. We created a very unique moment where, Providence created the moment where Lindsey Graham came into a unique unity with a base that will back him, and he likes that. Now, for the first time, he has an opportunity to exercise that power as somebody who is working with the president's agenda instead of another frustrating, Washington bureaucrat who's working with or against him. The secret is we have to keep the pressure on him so that he hears and receives the affirmation of doing what is supportive of the Trump administration. And we have to be very quick in challenging what he does the moment that he steps into that old role of being the autonomous guy that tells Trump what he really thinks, because he gets into that. I've heard him do it with the Mohammed bin Salman, for instance, with Saudi Arabia. I mean, these things are not simple. They're complicated in the global world. But Mohammed bin Salman is a reformer who's the first Saudi that has actually been friends with Israel, and he's in alignment with Trump. And now, so they have this disastrous situation with this journalist take place, who was actually an opposition journalist, and when that happened, right away, Lindsey Graham starts mouthing off against the president's policy of being careful about how we proceed here. And he's kind of talking, he's a bit of a hawk. And I was thinking then, I hope this guy doesn't take on the mantle of being the loyal opposition, and he actually gets in alignment and does what has to be done. And I'm thinking it's going to be the people's response in his party that are going to help to shape the boundaries of what direction he moves in. So we got to keep influencing the opinion around his approval ratings.
And I'm not real versed in politics, but I've been in the ministry for a long time and around ministers, and I've seen ministers that would have flashes of inspiration and do something good, but when persecution comes, you can find out. And usually it takes a period of time standing the test before you get that grit to be able to handle it. And like you were saying, this is a relatively recent conversion on Graham's part, and we aren't sure that he's going to continue in that same direction. Pray that he does.
That's my assessment too.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so this is Cowboy, who is also watching on AWM tonight. He says, Lance, with the Democrats taking control of the House and our national debt being a great threat to our economic stability and national security, how do you see the risk of a bipartisan cooperation?
Great question. The number one threat in the United States, apart from the anarchy and the increasing danger of millennials voting who are 55% in favor of socialism because they've been propagandized by government taxpayer-funded professors who are poisoning them, which is another subject. What's going to happen with the debt is a real challenge, because Donald Trump wrote, and I've got his book, he predicted that $21 to $22 trillion is the magic number when the amount of debt that America is handling can no longer be sustained, and it leads to the implosion of us as an economy. He's well aware of what the situation is. There is a total absence of backbone in Washington among anyone, because no politician who with interest in their own electoral future wants to be seen as the person who is going to cut back on a single thing that's going to affect their constituency. So we have a real problem there. However, on the other hand, I think the other story with the Democrats winning the House, which is good news, is that by winning it, they got into office on the basis of local elections and governors that appealed to a more moderate or middle temperament. They are not going to behave that way in Congress. They've got 11, 12 investigations they cannot wait to unleash on Donald Trump, and in order to destabilize. They're going to bring his children up before the House. They're going to do everything in their power to tear this man down before 2020 and impeach him. And I believe that in spite of the fact that candidates ran towards the middle and the leftists were not getting elected, they're gonna go at Trump like radicals, and it's going to backfire. And what that does mean is that they're going to overplay their hand, which is what the devil predictably always does.
Yep.
And the American people are going to end up developing a greater sympathetic bond with Trump. And as he moves towards getting reelected in 2020, they did it with Clinton. They impeached Clinton, and it was a mistake because they did it over Monica Lewinsky on technicalities that they got. It was a gotcha moment. They got him. But the American public said, this looks like a personal political vendetta. We don't really think these issues are valid. And so Clinton got reelected after he was impeached. I can almost predict the same thing will go on in the direction of Donald Trump. And out of that strength, he will be able to govern going into the next election cycle, making some tough claims and shutting down government if necessary. And by the way, his approval ratings, I think, go up when he shuts down government. It's McConnell and the Senate that doesn't have the stomach for it. But that's his inclination, is to not keep raising the debt. And by 2020, I think he's going to have the ability to push in and face that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that when Pelosi was the Speaker of the House last time, that our national debt went through the roof. Mm-hmm. She presided over that, and so history shows that that is her inclination. Yeah. And Trump is going to have to push back, or it could push us beyond that threshold you were talking about, Lance. Mm-hmm.
You know, speaking of Pelosi, we've got a question here that's coming in from the Truth and Liberty website. And the question is, why did Trump endorse Pelosi for House Speaker?
And the answer is obvious. Because he was engaging in a rare moment of mature, civil political discourse. and he was trying his best to act like a statesman. And the moment that he behaved like presidents are supposed to behave, the left predictably began acting like a Rottweiler with a pork chop wrapped around its neck. And so it attacked him. And he had to deal with it. So if you read the transcript, he was so statesmanlike. Congratulations. I look forward to working with you. And we have infrastructure and pharmaceutical issues. We have some things we could do. And he was giving a warning. On the other hand, it could be that they simply want to embroil this administration with more and more indictments and suits and such, in which case they're going to get nothing accomplished, and everybody's going to see, and I'll play hardball back. And so he laid out the parameters of his policy. If you're nice to me, we can work together and get something done. If you're going to go after me like you've been doing, then I'm going to go back at you. And I've got the Senate now, and I have some options. So that in itself would have been a great news conference to analyze. But Acosta had to take it captive and get and misbehave. So Trump could not be civil because they won't let him.
You know, I really think that Trump's real strength is a deal maker. That guy knows how to negotiate. Exactly. And I think that he is doing this deliberately to put Pelosi in a position to where he's welcomed her, he's reached out, he's done all of this stuff. And I think it's going to give him leverage that, if she doesn't give him something back, he will play hardball with her. And I think she knows it. I think it's a smart move.
If she doesn't take the embrace.
That's right.
Yeah. He may be
the embrace. I love that. For those of you who don't know, that Donald Trump talked about the embrace, that he offered the embrace, and every candidate that received the embrace did pretty well in the midterms. And those that rejected the embrace, they didn't make it.
That's right.
So I think you're right. I think that your point is well taken, that what Trump, the president, is going to do is he's going to hammer how the Democrats are obstructionists that are only interested in themselves and not America. And let's face it, nobody has been able to control media sound bites like this guy, even though they're all against him.
Yeah.
He's like, I always say, he's like the guy with the laser pointer playing with a cat. He keeps on, he'll just control that news cycle and get, boom, right into the wall. There they go, into the wall again.
That's good.
Great analogy.
That is good.
It is. Okay, this is how, and his question is coming in on chat, and he says, what can be done about this caravan that is coming from Honduras?
So what are the facts on the caravan? And Andrew, you were telling me that you got some information, which I think our viewers would be very interested in knowing about.
Well, I think it was the head of the Homeland Security. Isn't that a woman?
Yes,
I
it
can't
is.
remember her name. But I heard her speak, and somebody was asking her a similar question, and she said, look, these are not desperate people that are fleeing poverty and oppression and political things. They are people that were hired, they were incentivized to do this, and she had sent people down there, and they've actually done interviews, and I'm sure that there are some people in there who maybe join the thing, but the movement itself it's all political, and it has been funded by people like Soros and other people, and it is a political invasion of this nation, and we've got the right to defend ourselves.
Absolutely.
It's one of the great singular outrages of the press that we have people embedded among this caravan that are interviewing them, and they're able to expose the fact that these are not people fleeing asylum. They are not people that are trying to get away from persecution. There are actually people that are, and the majority of them that were interviewed say they're simply coming here for a better economic life. And so they're coming to be able to get into the country. Now, there's some people I ran into, Andrew. We should do an interview with them and maybe let's get everyone watching this. You need to send some money to Truth and Liberty so we can get the budget to know you want investigative reporting, because you're hearing us, but wouldn't you love to have some stuff from out there on the front lines that we could get reporters telling us about?
We could send you down there, Lance.
Well, I would fit right in. I'm like a little guy. I look like I'm running a cartel, don't I?
But I remember that during the last border incident where they were talking about the children being taken away from the parents, which all they were doing, they were putting the parents in jail because they crossed illegally and they didn't want the children to be in jail. Right. But anyway, they totally misrepresented that, and I heard that they actually showed footage from back during Obama's administration when the children were separated, but they were using that footage to criticize Trump.
That's the point I was going to get to. 90% of the are males. They're not women and children. They move the women and children to the front of the photo ops for secular media, but it's mostly males in the caravan, not women and children. I met a group of women who have a nonprofit, and they go down to the border, Andrew, and they are moms against illegal immigration. Imagine that. Mothers against illegal immigration. And they went down for themselves to see what's going on. And here's what they found. They met with the parents, the mothers on the border where the illegals cross over. And what's happening is the caravan group has a forward group that is breaking up into groups of hundreds and thousands, and they're fanning out. And where the border is porous enough for people to cross over, there are blue ice boxes that are put out by people on the Texas side, and it shows them on the southern side where it's safe to cross over because it's just a wire fence, and they literally have the footage of this, and they've interviewed the people that say it's right across my lawn. I can see where it's happening because they find a place where they can break up and come through rather than doing the whole unit coming forward at once. So.
And I think Trump did a wonderful thing this last week, and he said that any person who crosses the border illegally will not be eligible for asylum. To me, that should have always been the way it was.
Logical, makes sense.
But
that
what
just makes sense.
What does it mean with Tijuana today? So this is interesting. Mexicans in Tijuana are actually, they themselves are pushing back and resisting the entrance and passage of the caravan through Tijuana because the Mexicans themselves are not in Tijuana are not interested in having this whole armada come through their own community, and so they're basically mounting a resistance, which is kind of fascinating because it's not everybody isn't sympathetic with having their city walked through by a caravan of questionable people from another country.
And I just don't understand why people would vote for open borders where you allow any person to come in. I mean, there's economic reasons against it. There's security reasons against it. MS-13 terrorists, on and on and on you go. Yeah. There is not a nation on this planet that has what the Democrats are advocating for the U.S. It's disastrous.
We'd no longer be a nation if we didn't have borders.
Well, that's true. That's what defines you as a nation.
That's right.
Well, and there's only one reason why that happens. People disconnect personal consequence to the decisions they make regarding government. You know, it's if you were to come to me and say, Lance, don't you care about that family over there? I say, I do. And then you say, well, if you don't mind, I'm going to take your money and do something with it to help them. Well, at that moment, I go, well, why don't you use your own money? But you see, that's what government does. Yeah. Government says, I'm concerned about something. I'm going to take your money and do something about it. And the person who doesn't realize it's their money says, yeah, go ahead, take their money and do something about it. It's the people that actually are paying the taxes and the people that are actually funding the government who are the ones who should be aware of the fact that all the benevolence that's being voted in by millennials or other people or even illegals that say the government should do this and be generous and give this stuff away, at the end of the day, it's going to come out of the pockets of the people that are paying the taxes. And once that revelation hits home, you reevaluate what government policies you've got.
And you could take that analogy another step and say that if you really are so concerned about children and women that are destitute and they are hungry and things like this, well, then why didn't you extend that into your street or into your town and take the hungry off the street and put them in your bed and give them your food and let them take their shower in your shower and allow these terrorists into your house?
Yeah, exactly.
See,
right.
that's what they're asking on a national level instead of just a local level.
That's true.
Exactly
We
right.
got time for one last question.
Okay, Lance, I want to let people know how to connect with you as well. So I'll just give you your website here real quick. Go to lancewallnau.com. There's a lot of resources, articles, blogs, really a lot of content. And Jeff Arndt from the Truth and Liberty chat has a question for you, Lance, regarding your involvement in D.C. And he says, is your D.C. office up and running? And will you be spending more time in D.C. at the very seat in the gate of influence of the government law mountain?
Well, I can hear where he thinks I ought to be.
You can.
Yeah, we're spending more time all the time. My residence is in the great state of Texas. But we have our offices both here and up there. But what's funny is, you want to know where most of my activity comes from when I'm in Washington? It's the lobby of the Trump Hotel. I do most of my meetings there. It's a great vortex for hanging out with people. So we'll be up there more in the next year, and because from 2019 to 2020, I'm really focusing on governments globally and
Lance,
freedom of religion.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we've only got 30 seconds, and we do have to break because this is being broadcast on networks that is time sensitive.
Yes.
I gotta go. Well, I can't answer the question.
Well, you took too long. We love you, brother. Thank you for being with us, and thank all of you for joining us. I tell you, this was great, and we will have it archived on our truthandliberty.net website, so you can go back and review it or send someone else there. But it's been great. Thank you for joining us. God bless you. We'll see you next Monday.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net.